Today in the Penalty Box Woodshop, I'm going to show you how I made this super simple desktop out of plywood. Well, and a few other things, but mostly plywood. When I'm not in the shop, odds are you can find me in my office. It's kind of my little oasis within our home where I can edit my content, record my podcast, and just hang out. I've always loved a standing desk and I've used them for years at my job, so I figured one for the home office would be great. My friends over at Uplift Desk were kind enough to send me a V2 base with a ton of accessories, and I was excited to make a desktop for it that fit my space. I wanted to get one completed quickly, and I also wanted to do so utilizing as much material that I already had in my shop as I could. I knew that I had about a half of a sheet of 3/4 inch plywood left over from a recent build, so I figured I would start there. I wanted to make a desktop that was durable, but I also wanted it to look good with the black metal base, so plain old plywood wasn't going to cut it. So I jumped on Amazon and bought a 4x8 sheet of laminate for about $60 and went to work. I cut my plywood to length and width and then grabbed some walnut that I had on the shelf and cut them to the same width as the plywood. The walnut was basically the same dimensions as store-bought 1x2, so I figured this would work perfect as an edge banding for the plywood. Also, who doesn't love walnut on just about any project? After cutting the end pieces, I clamped them in place with pipe clamps, and I used my square to mark lines that started on the plywood and extended onto the edge banding. This will be for biscuits that I'll install later. If you have never used biscuits or a biscuit joiner before, they are very helpful at keeping boards aligned during glue up and are very simple to cut and install. Once I had my marks on each end, I got my measurements for the long sides. You can get fancy if you want and miter the corners of the edge banding, but I'm just sticking with the basics on this project, so my long side pieces will extend the full length of the top, leaving the end grain exposed on the short sides. After cutting the side pieces, I clamped them in place and again used my square to make several equally spaced marks for the biscuits. Before taking the clamps off, I made sure to label each side of the plywood and each piece of the walnut with a number so that I could put them back in their correct spots when it was time for final assembly. I moved the plywood into the shop and got the biscuit joiner out to cut all the slots. After cutting the slots on the plywood, I clamped one of the edge band boards down and used it as a backstop while I cut the slots in the walnut in each of the corresponding marks. I then applied some Titebond wood glue to each piece of the walnut, placed the biscuits in their slots, and then attached each side. I was also sure to get some glue in each of the slots on the plywood for the biscuits. This is the part where you realize that you really can't have enough clamps. I only had 2 pipe clamps long enough for the end pieces, so I just used 2 shorter clamps and made it work. Next, I got the side pieces glued up, clamped on, and left them to dry for a while. Once the glue was set up, I removed the clamps and used a scraper to remove any squeeze out glue that had dried on the surface. I needed this entire surface flat and smooth to apply the laminate correctly, so I used my sander and went over the entire tabletop a few times with 80 and 100 grit paper. With the tabletop ready to go, I opened the Formica Laminate and cut it about 4 inches longer and wider than the tabletop itself. This should give me plenty of overhang on each side when it comes time to glue it up. I'm sure there are plenty of ways to cut this stuff, but my battery-powered track saw worked perfectly. This was actually my first time working with Formica Laminate, so I wasn't sure what to expect, and as it turns out, it's a pretty easy process. I flipped the laminate over and applied contact cement to the entire backside using a foam roller. I also apply the cement to the tabletop, ensuring to cover the entire area with the cement. This stuff is actually pretty cool. You apply it to both surfaces and let it dry to the touch. Then once the two surfaces come in contact with one another, the cement creates a permanent bond. With this being my first time using this process, I asked my good friend and woodworking mentor James to come help me out. James has taught me a lot about woodworking over the years, so I figured instead of me explaining this next part, I'll just let this play and you can learn while he teaches me.
Okay.
I saw that. It's whenever you get it on. Now, did you get a good coat on the edges too?
I did.
Okay.
I did. I think it just looks differently because it's the walnut.
Now, how much wider is that than this?
Just a couple inches on each side.
Okay.
A couple inches long on each side.
All right. We'll actually get it kind of lined up where you want it, and then I'll have to go ahead of you. You're gonna just gradually lay it down, and I'm gonna start taking these out, and then we'll let it go down, and then because we don't want any air bubbles.
Gotcha.
You're gonna have to just roll this way. You're gonna roll it every way you can in order to get that thing flattened out.
Wonderful.
And we'll want to put some weights on top of this.
Okay, I got paint buckets.
Okay. Okay.
What do you think?
And I'll need to get, I can get this next one out as you work. Are you filming?
I am.
Okay.
Good.
Because you won't get a redo on this.
No. We're not getting any fancy camera angles either. We're just getting straight up what we get.
Yeah, that's a pretty good heavy paint can. I'll move it down here. Okay. So let's do this. Let's put the heavy one, and you put the lighter ones. All right, friend.
Right.
Let it sit for a while.
What we did here. I need one more here.
All right.
While the cement cured, I recruited a few more helpers and put together the uplift base for the desk. Nothing real hard about this process, and it didn't take long at all. After 24 hours, the cement was fully cured and it was time to finish up the desktop. I installed a flush trim bit into the cordless router and used it to trim the laminate flush with the outside edge on all four sides. Next, I installed a roundover bit and adjusted it so that it created a slight edge profile. This will cut the laminate back from the edge and leave a nice aesthetic look to the walnut trim. Once the router work was complete, I hand sanded the walnut to 180 grit with some sanding sponges. For the finish on the walnut, I went with Rubio Monocoat Pure. This stuff is awesome and has quickly become my go-to finish. Some of the cool things about this stuff is that you only have to sand 180 grit, and to apply, you just wipe it on. It takes a very small amount to cover large areas, and it smells great too. And with that, the tabletop is finished and ready to be installed on the base. This really was an easy desktop to build. It looks great in the office, and the laminate top was cheap and durable enough to take a beating for the years to come.
All right, folks, that does it for this video today. I hope you enjoyed it. I want to give a special shout out to Uplift Desk for sending me the table base to make this video with. This thing is awesome and I highly recommend it. Don't forget to visit www.penaltyboxwoodshop.com and go check out that video because I know you'll love it. We'll see you on the next one.